Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening for some of you that are in other parts of the world. Very excited today to welcome in Tom Hume and Megan O'Boyle from RareX to talk about their new data collection platform. You will see my daughter Ella making surprise appearances here and there, but what we wanted to do today is bring everybody together to talk about this new effort that we're incredibly excited and grateful for the opportunity. Just for a little bit of background, we are one of a handful of other neurodevelopmental disorder organizations and conditions that have joined together for this initial launch. And what we're striving to do is create better information for researchers and for our community. And so Tom and Megan, we've been in behind the scenes for probably the past few months with two other members of the KS community as well. I want to make sure to acknowledge both Monica Christie as well as Tanya Zadolsek from Slovenia. Monica is here in the States, but the three of us have really worked hard behind the scenes on creating this opportunity, making sure that we were contributing where we needed to be so that we can bring this value add to the community. So without further ado, I'll introduce Megan and Tom, and make sure if you have any questions to go ahead and put them in the chat, and I will be sure to try to consolidate all of them and provide them for a Q&A at the end of the session.
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan O'Boyle. I am the parent of a 20-year-old daughter with rare syndrome that is actually very similar to Kleefstra. And I am here today to talk to you about data collection and why it's important and not as boring as it sounds. And I'll let you meet Tom, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Hume, and I help RareX with marketing, but I'm no stranger to rare disease, as my wife and I started a foundation about 15 years ago called Cure JM. It's for our middle son who has an autoimmune disease called juvenile dermatomyositis. But welcome today.
So I'll just get started with sharing screen. I want to give a little bit of background on myself. I am not a researcher. I don't have a big research background or science, and I never founded an organization. I was a parent, just plugging along with my daughter for 10 years, trying to get her what she needed, and actually wasn't really involved in our foundation very much, but was approached to help collect data. And for the last 10 years, I've been working with our foundation and our families and researchers around the world, and have learned a lot about the importance of data, the importance of collecting the right data, and the importance of getting data in the right hands. I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with the Kleefstra community, and I've been blown away by what IDefine has accomplished in an incredibly short period of time. There's over 9,000 rare diseases. I've worked with several of them. I've watched many of them get established and grow. And I will tell you, your community is doing an amazing job. This is just one thing that they had really a great vision for early on. Many groups don't think to collect this type of data for many years. In my own community, it was several decades before we had something like this. So kudos to all of you. So I'll just give you a little overview of the next half hour or 45 minutes. Who are we? What are we solving for? Why do we exist? What does this project or program look like? And what's in it for you, and what do you need to get involved? So RareX is a new nonprofit. We were created by several people who were incredibly frustrated by how slow drug development was in the rare disease space. They have created this nonprofit built on incredible technology and a very collaborative spirit. RareX is a platform to collect, which we'll talk about today, connect, which we hope to do in the future, and share data, which is ultimately what we want. We don't own your data. You own it. I'll tell you more about that later. We don't sell it, not even to industry, pharmaceutical companies, or biotechs. And we don't do any analysis or research on that data. We're a conduit. We are getting it from the right people and getting it in the hands of the right people. RareX is powered by an incredible technology at the Broad Institute in Massachusetts, which is a collaborative nonprofit between Harvard and MIT, and the Broad Institute shares our vision as well. So why is data collection in rare disease so important? And there's several reasons, but there's also several barriers. And one is there's data, but it's in one place and it's controlled by one person. Or there was data collected, but the funding ran out and the person that was collecting it is no longer involved. And so it's sitting somewhere, essentially in a file cabinet on a computer getting dusty. There's also data that's collected, but it's not collected in a structured way and or collected under the right ethical oversight. And this means people have gone to the effort of giving their data, but yet it can't be used, which equals wasted time and money. But for many, many diseases, the data just doesn't exist. And it's expensive and it's time consuming to collect. But I really want to emphasize throughout this is parent-patient reported data. But there are also other studies that are what's called clinician reported data. In the cases of Phelan-McDermid syndrome and Kleefstra, we as parents are answering the questions of the clinicians in their office. So it's ultimately parent reported as well. But this is one thing that differentiates. So on this crowded slide, you get to see Kleefstra on the far left. And as Jeff said, you all are part of early adopters of an incredible effort. And your organization had the foresight to want to be part of this early effort. And we are appreciative of that. So along with 9 or 10 other conditions that are similar to Kleefstra, each group, like you will learn today, will have a chance to set up accounts, answer some surveys. Down the road, you'll get a chance to answer more surveys. That's the little things in the blue section. And then at the bottom, you'll see the green, and that's researchers of all types, researchers from academic universities, from health centers, and also from industry, biotech companies and large pharmaceutical companies. They are also researchers. So we make this data available for free to all of those researchers. We do not sell it, and we collect it for free for all of the organizations like IDefine. So data governance is kind of a boring but very burdensome topic. And so we've decided that your organization shouldn't waste time and money doing it. So RareX is handling it for you. This means that we are taking the responsibility of collecting the data responsibly, storing it, protecting it, keeping it confidential, as well as meeting the data regulations of all the countries around the world who will be participating. So as you see, that is not a job that Jeff wanted to do on his own. So why did IDefine and the Kleefstra community decide to go with this new and exciting platform? One, their interest in speeding up drug development. Two, that we have a mission at RareX not to just let anybody ask any questions with any answers that you're curious about, but we offer structured, standardized data. And I can get into that a little bit more, but essentially we are using questions or surveys that have been developed and vetted for certain symptoms and are proven to yield the data that both researchers, but drug development companies and regulators like FDA need. Patient owned, own it, and managed. And I'll explain that more when I talk about the data sharing agreement. We already touched on the governance. And we were chosen because the Kleefstra community recognizes that there's one-offs, there's collecting data for your community and then having researchers knock on your door one by one to get that data. And then there's RareX. And although we're collecting data for your community, we're also collecting data for many, many rare diseases across the board. And the researchers access that data in one centralized portal. So again, Jeff and others in the community are not tasked with deciding which researchers should have access and to what. RareX also has the ability to connect. As I said before, we collect and connect to existing data sources, and we'll work with researchers in your space to see where we can do that whenever possible. There's no cost to IDefine or your community or your families. And this means you can use that money that you need to raise for other endeavors. And again, no cost to researchers. And this may sound odd, but many data collection platforms choose to sell data, and we consider that a barrier. So what's in it for you? I mean, you already gave up either your lunch or your shower to sit and watch this webinar. So why should you give up another 30 minutes this week to answer questions that may look like questions you've answered before? And there's many answers to that. One is researchers will be able to identify patients that are most appropriate for further studies, deeper dive studies. They will also be able to identify people that might be just the right patients for their drug trials. So being part of this makes you part of a pool where you may be chosen as the right candidate for the right study. Again, the way I described that portal, researchers from around the world, whether they've heard of Kleefstra syndrome or not, will be logging into this federated research portal and querying data. They don't have to query it based on disease name. They could query it based on all patients under the age of 12 with a diagnosis of developmental delays and epilepsy. And if your family member met that, then their data would be seen. And more than likely, let's face it, the researchers never heard of Kleefstra syndrome, but now they're looking at your family member's data. And to me, this is really, really exciting. But they're also going to be looking at data possibly on my daughter who qualifies for those criteria and thousands of other patients from hundreds of other syndromes. And this is how we're going to find treatments for several diseases faster than one disease at a time. There's also an ability to collect with patient organizations, but if you're on this webinar, then you probably have already connected with IDefine. But in many diseases, there's patients that will find us, but will not be aware of the patient support group, and we will help them find them. The ability to update your symptoms over time. Not only is this a great ability, it's a necessity. So most research studies are for 1 to 5, maybe even 10 years, but they're limited. And this program will go on indefinitely, and its success relies on the ability of you to come in at least once a year and update your information. That doesn't mean that you have to answer every question again. It just means you have to change what has changed or check a box that says nothing's changed. But in order to really know a disease, you have to study it over time. And the way to study it over time is for everybody to check in over time. So I urge you, and we at RareX work really hard to keep the burden to you low, not asking unnecessary questions, not giving you too many questions at once. The ability to manage your data, which I said I would talk about, and then obviously we all want faster treatments. So what do you need to get started? You don't need your medical report or your medical records. You don't need to know everything about your grandparents' medical history. And you don't need a lot of time. We're looking at maybe 30 minutes. And as we release other surveys, it may even be login, and it may be even in less time, depending on how many surveys are applicable to you. And you don't have to finish all at once. Let's face it. Jeff is probably going to get interrupted during the next 15 minutes and have to go off camera. We as parents have unpredictable lives. And so RareX understands that. And if you get distracted and have to walk away and come back a week later, you'll be where you left off. You'll log in and go to your dashboard, and you'll know where you left off. We do ask that you use some specific browsers and stay away from Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer. And this is what your journey, what your experience is going to be. You can go to the IDefine site, which they've done a fantastic job of developing. You'll see an ability to link to what we call the community page, which I'll show you at the end of this, which is going to give you some more information, and answers to frequently asked questions. And then you'll click on Start Here, and you'll set up your account like you do for everything else with a password. You'll complete the patient consent, which is a one-time activity. And then you'll answer what we call the data sharing agreement, which is about how you manage your data. And then you're off to the races with the surveys. This shows several surveys once you all get involved, you'll see that there's only going to be 3 surveys to start. But over time, based on what you say in the general medical survey, you will be invited to answer other surveys in the future. So this is just a screenshot of the community page, and I'll go to it at the end of this. I don't want to distract everybody, but here's the Get Started button. And this is how you get started. And then you're going to come to this first page, which says dashboard. And the first thing you're going to do is add participant. I just want to, let me just see. It's not there. At some point, I'm going to show you how to expand and contract the dashboard. Currently, it's going to be contracted and you're going to want it expanded. And so I'll show you that little trick. You're going to have some basic questions, which are going to drive what kind of consent you're sent to. If you're in the United States, you'll pick your state. And prior to this screen, there is a question that says, check whether you are the patient, a parent or guardian, or the loved one of a patient that has passed away. So once you choose that persona, that's going to route you to questions worded in a certain way. When it asks you the disease, you'll see Kleefstra, clear as day, in the dropdown. And then you're off to the consent. We tend to just hit next, 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 and sign the end of the consent. I don't think I've ever read an iTunes terms of conditions, but we want you to know everything about this. And so we've tried to structure it in a way where we have questions that you might have and the answers to them. And then for those who want to know more, we have longer answers. So you'll see here on the left, who can access my data, but if I want more detail, I can hit learn more, and then there's a drop down. On the second to last page of the consent, there's 2 very important questions. I started out by saying that you will have the opportunity to be chosen for surveys based on your family members' criteria. In order for that to happen, you would need to check yes. Sorry, that was the second question. The first one is the follow-up surveys. So if you said yes to neurological issues on the general survey, if anything were to come up in neurological issues in the future, like a sleep survey or an epilepsy survey, we would want to share that with you. And so for both of these questions, I encourage you to check yes. The last page of the consent is, if you're the parent or guardian answering this, first you're going to give your child's legal names and then yours. And this information will pre-fill some other fields going forward. So this is the data sharing agreement that I've referred to like 4 times. And this is where you as the patient, not IDefine, not any other organization, you get to decide how broadly your data is shared. I personally want my data shared as broadly as possible because I want as many eyes on it as possible, but it's a personal decision. If you want it shared broadly, you would check general research, and there's a detailed description of what that means. If you would like it shared more narrowly, then you would check the second option, health, medical, biomedical research. You can't not check a box here. If you didn't check a box here, you wouldn't be able to share your data with anybody. But it is an either or page. This page, I personally skipped. It's very important that you see this word optional up here. This is for people who feel very strongly about really getting narrow or restrictive with where their data goes. And this page, you can check neither, which is what I chose, one, the other, or both. The first box talks about researchers solely for non-commercial purposes. The bottom line here is if you check this box, you are saying no to having any pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies that want to find a drug for you to see your data. So this would preclude, lock them out. The second one is that you only want research done by researchers that have been given it's a certification from an ethics review board that what their study is doing. Again, you can check one, neither, one, or both. These next few questions are Great, but I don't want you to get confused. These are questions to help us and your organizations in the future make some decisions. So the first question is, do you have any biosample? Like, have you given blood or any sort of biosample to any researcher? If so, can you remember where it was? And if so, can you just type it in? The second question is, are you interested in this? We're not collecting any biosamples right now, but we want to know if you're interested, so your community and your researchers know, and that if it ever becomes something that RareX can offer, we know that you want to be contacted. Similarly, for medical records, would you be interested if the IDefine organization was collecting medical records somewhere and getting that data all clean and organized, having that data linked to your RareX data? If you say yes, that's fantastic, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen automatically. But we want to know if you're interested in that. The second question on the left is, do you want to be connected with an organization, which would basically mean we would share your name and email with the IDefine organization, which again, I'm guessing they already have. And the last question on the right is, what other studies have you been in? So our little cheat sheet is, these are some of the studies that you may have participated in, and you may have forgotten what they were called or where they were. And I would imagine that Jeff will have this posted somewhere as well. We've already spoken to the wonderful people at GenIDA, and we know that they and Dr. Kleefstra are very excited about what they're collecting, and we think it's great. GenIDA is very specific to intellectual disabilities and autism. And although we're going to ask some questions about that, we will never ask as many questions as they are. And this is to say, you aren't in one or the other. We encourage you to be in both. So here's the dashboard, and you'll see in green, this person has completed the consent and the data sharing. And now we're going to click on start and get to the general information, which is an easier way of saying demographics. The names that you put in the consent should pre-fill here, and this asks just to make sure that it's the same. Then you're going to get the general demographic questions that you get all the time. For various research reasons, we've made most, or if not all, of these questions required, but you've got an out if you don't want to answer the question, and you just check the bottom answer, which is prefer not to answer. For our non-United States families, my apologies if you think the ethnicity question is odd, but this is the way people in the United States research community ask the question. Hispanic or Latino, non-Hispanic or Latino, unknown, prefer not to answer. I know it doesn't make sense to you guys, but this is the standard way of collecting data for the United States. Genetic testing. Let's hope you've had it. Let's hope you know where the report is. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of this data for researchers. They don't want to just know what symptoms your family member has. They want to know how that might correlate to the genetic situation your family has. So these questions about genetic tests are important, and not today, but soon you will have the ability to scan your genetic report at home and then upload it to this profile. And you'll get an email from us and probably one from Jeff and a reminder on Facebook in a couple months saying, it's time to upload your genetic report. And I can't emphasize the importance of this enough. In our own community, our researchers will not look at data from people, from families that have not submitted a genetic report. And we don't want you spending time uploading data without that might not be looked at. So now we're on to the health and development pages. Now you're going to start to see some questions you recognize. On the right-hand side is the patient had behavior or psychiatric issues. It's a very broad question, and they give some examples: autism, schizophrenia, aggression. I had yes to a lot of the questions in here, but there's not going to be a deeper dive. If you say yes to this, there's not going to be another 10 questions related to it yet. Down the road, if you say yes to something in this survey, you will get an email, or you'll see on your dashboard when you log in that new surveys are available. If you say no to something, we're not going to bother with you. If you don't have skin issues, you're never going to see the skin survey. So just other examples. And you can see here that there's an answer for unknown. And this is a perfectly good question to talk about in terms of updating. Is the patient able to walk without assistance? My daughter did not walk until she was 3, but at 4, she could walk. So my answer would have gone from no, no, no to age 4, yes. And that's where you see progression of disease. So again, super important that you come back annually. How old was the patient when there were first concerns? This doesn't mean when your doctor finally admitted to you what you've been telling them for a year that there's a problem. This is when did you see concerns? And I just want to be clear, if you check months and put 9, that's 9 months. If you check years by accident, it's going to say 9 years. So just be aware of those 2 fields. And I think the next one is, okay, this is where you can really let us have it. This first answer that you're going to put in here, which you put in earlier, is going to be Kleefstra. But some diseases, like my daughter's, have multiple names. They're named by chromosome, they're named by gene, and they're named by the person that discovered it. So because there's multiple names to diseases, and there's over 9,000 diseases, we don't have a drop down here. So you can type in whatever way you see your disease, and you can be as detailed as you want. But don't put every symptom on that line. What you want to do is you want to hit this green box that says add another diagnosis. And for my daughter, I added autism. Somebody else might add ASD. Somebody else might say autistic-like behaviors. Any of those answers are fine. We will do the work to match everything up appropriately. I then hit add another, and I put seizures. You could put epilepsy. Add another, lymphedema. Add another, and I think I stopped at 15 because those were the ones I could remember. But one of the frustrations with giving data sometimes is you want the world to know how complex your child is, and sometimes you're pigeonholed into 1 or 2 things, and RareX wants to know all of it. Your family member also may have a diagnosis that's completely unrelated to Kleefstra, but it affects their lives, like allergies or something that they inherited from, their grandfather. And that is reportable. Don't feel that you only report on what is associated with Kleefstra. All right, we're back to the dashboard. We're making progress. Oops, you got to leave. You log in a week from now and you'll know that you completed 2 things, but you still have 1 more survey left. So quality of life, when we say structured and standardized surveys, that means we didn't make up these questions. We looked at all the quality of life questions surveys out there, and our data scientists said, this survey is going to yield the data that will be most useful to researchers. But some of us are parents of nonverbal children, and these kinds of surveys can be frustrating because I don't know if my daughter feels lonely because she can't articulate that. So we have made sure that if that is the case, you can say unable to answer because of my child's condition or communication. The reason that we would rather you check this box than skip is when researchers get data and there's no answer, that's called dirty data. They don't know if you got distracted, your child is too young for it to be applicable, the question depressed you so you skipped it, or you didn't understand it. And each of those things means something different to a researcher. So by giving them the unable to answer, that makes the data more clean. Again, some of these questions may not feel applicable, and over time we'll be getting feedbacks from communities like you. And who knows, maybe we'll have a different kind of quality of life for other types of communities. Okay, so we're back to the dashboard. And what if there's more than 1 member of the family that has Kleefstra? That's where you hit add participant. So that means you don't have to set up a new account with a new password and remember which email you used for which kid. It's all in one place. So why are we asking you to answer questions similar to the ones that you have answered for other researchers, and maybe to the ones that you'll answer 6 months or 2 years from now for a new study? And that's because this is different. This is not by one institution, funded by one institution. that is for a limited amount of time. That will be likely data that will be not broadly shared. As I explained, this will allow for cross-disease research. We want lots of diseases that look like Kleefstra or genetically are near Kleefstra to be in this collection, so researchers can look at like what's similar and what's not. The next point is really important, and that is these questions are focused on drug development. There are things that you as families care about. There's things that you as an organization at IDefine care about. But if we ask all the questions that you all care about, you won't come back every year because it will be a lot more than a half an hour's worth of work. So we are trying to ask the least number of questions about the things that drug development needs. But in my organization, people really want to know at what age those who can talk learn to talk, and at what age those who were potty trained were potty trained. And if those questions turn out to be important to drug development, they will be in RareX. But there will be questions like that that perhaps your organization or community may collect in a different way, like on Facebook or SurveyMonkey. And again, that's not because we don't want to serve your needs. It's because we're trying to keep the number of questions down to a minimum. Your families are affected by more than one system in the body. So for every system in the body, there's going to be a survey eventually. And we don't want to add unnecessary questions. So please don't be frustrated that we're not asking everything you want to answer, but work with IDefine about things that are important to you or your IEP, or to convince your mother-in-law that this is not something your child's going to grow out of. And then the ability to update over years and years. I sound like a broken record, but you've got to come back. What we encourage families to do is come back after your annual visit, get home from the doctor's appointment and just update. Or you can do it when you change your batteries in your smoke detector. But whenever you do it, please do it on a regular basis. Feeling Jeff will remind you as well. So I'm going to stop. Actually, I'm going to go to this community page. Tom, can you see it? So you will get to this site from this link that I'm sure IDefine will share across social media in the next few days. But you could also find it through the website. And it's a one page, you scroll all the way down. But if you want to get to the FAQ, you click at the top, it'll take you down to where you need. Who can participate in this program? There's the answer. And then back up at the top, information here, why you should give up 30 minutes of your day to do this. And then you'll hit get started, and that'll take you to the setting up an account. So, Jeff, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's awesome, and I think it's worth reinforcing the collaborative and complementary partnership that RareX brings to the table, right? I don't think it's, we spoke a handful of times with the team at GenIDA and how beneficial they viewed RareX, right? That they see the opportunity. Both Jean-Louis and Pauline from GenIDA were both very excited about what RareX is bringing to the table. And so it's not a replacement, it's a supplemental effort. And again, as we've talked about several times, being collaborative, using the information that's out there so we're not having to be redundant, and then carry that forward, I think is incredibly important to highlight again and again. And so we've spoken several times with some of you know Sebastian Ziegler, and he's based in Germany, and he has a big effort to continuously get people enrolled with GenIDA. And this is not to curb that, this is not to halt that, it's meant to continuously to promote that and support that. And this opportunity, I think that we could discuss further, because there's a couple of questions in the chat about, right now, this survey is in English. So across the world, it's in English. And there's reasons to that, and you can get in the weeds pretty quickly here. But if Tom or Megan, if you want to just cover why it's in English and how that's relevant.
Sure. So first and foremost, Rare X is going to be global. There are diseases that have less than 24 people in the world. We can't be an English-speaking data collection, but we have to start somewhere. We also have to do this stepwise. In other words, we have to do this in a way that's done under the legal and ethical ways of collecting data in all the countries around the world. For those of you who are in Europe, you recognize the term GDPR compliant, and RareX will be that, and they will have to do that country by country. So before, the burden is not for us to find translation. And Caroline, thank you so much for your offer. I get this from every group. There's so much generosity to do translation for us, but that's not the heavy lift. We'll have the translations done professionally, and we will also make sure that people in those countries review them for cultural appropriateness, because something that resonates in one culture does not resonate in another. But truly, before we get to that translation of word for word, we have to make sure that we meet the data sharing standards, regulations of the countries. And we have a whole governance team that will be in charge of doing that. And as we do it, we'll release translations. So our apologies to our non-English speaking families, but we will work as fast as we can to meet those needs. But this isn't something we can throw a Google Translate button on. From a governance standpoint, that's just not allowed. So it's not as simple as it may seem. But
and I think it's worth noting too that and I can empathize, just having had these conversations with you all for the past several months, is that sometimes when it comes to regulation, we feel like we're trying to hit a moving target, right? I mean, there's constant updates taking place. And honestly, this is again why, from IDefine, that we said, okay, this is beyond our capacity, right? We need to partner with somebody. And I guess the second point would be, there was actually a very relevant post made in one of the Kleefstra pages over the past couple of days that had two ladders side by side. One showed rungs that were spaced apart and very far apart, and the other one had it in incremental steps. So that's what we're doing here, is we're launching the effort in English, right, where you can access it from across the world. Is it the giant leap? No. But is it the incremental step to get to where we're going? 100%. So we have to be able to bite off what we can chew at the moment to be able to make progress. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck in this holding pattern where you can't take any steps. And that's the last place we want to be, right? So we do want this incredibly robust data set from our entire community. If we can get 50% of the community as a start, that's a great start, right? Especially when combined with these other 10, neurodevelopmental disorders that we share symptoms with. And I think that was kind of the second point that I wanted to speak on, is we talk about regression within our community, right? And a researcher looking at regression, how many people from our community are talking about, well, what are the signs of regression? We don't know, we don't know what are the kind of indicators that are happening. But guess what? Phelan-McDermid patients experience regression, Rett syndrome, Fragile X, all these other conditions experience it. And so being able to pool some of that data from them as well will help us all globally.
Exactly. And I can feel the frustration of the non-English speaking countries. And the last thing we want to be is another ugly American organization. We are global, and but we just have to do it right, and we have to do it under the right rules. The great thing is, once we have a survey, translated, it's translated for every disease that needs that survey. So it will pick up momentum as we get through these tedious times. I am going to screen share again one thing, and this came to our attention, and Tom's going to make an edit to it. But in this community page, if you scroll down to FAQ, is this program a United States only initiative, or is it global? Our current answer, which turns out is confusing, says this program will start in the United States and will move globally over time. So Jeff, we'll work to edit that page. And if there's any confusion on Facebook for people that were unable to see this webinar, the answer is anybody that can read English can participate. And we're working hard to make sure that this gets translated into not just two or three languages, but as many languages as possible. And I'll stop share.
Right. And so if someone has, if you're the patient or the parent and you don't speak the language, but you have a friend or someone else that can help you translate it, that can sit next to you as kind of your ambassador or your like right hand, that's fine. Right. So I know it's not the most efficient way, but there are ways to still engage, right, through this particular platform.
And I respect that GenIDA has 7 translations, but their hands are tied in a different way. They, like us, are collecting data and have to abide by ethics rules. And in France, the ethics rule says they can't collect any personal data, including birth date. So those of you who have participated may not remember this, but you shared an email, not a name. And we want to connect with the data that you've already given them so that you don't have to give it to us again. And they want to help us with that, but their hands are tied, and we're going to work with them to see if there's any way that we can somehow make the data connect. And they're incredibly collaborative people, and they were very excited about what we're doing. So I want to go back to what Jeff and I have both said. This is not competing with or replacing any other research studies. This is going to add to them. And one thing that took me many years to understand is I naively thought that all the researchers that wanted to know about Phelan-McDermid would come to us. We'd give them all of this data, 300 very burdensome questions, and they'd publish on it and we would move science. And what happened was they came to us so that they could recruit for studies so that they could do a deeper dive. They found our data interesting, but they had to collect their own very, very specific data. So there's never going to be a one place, one stop shop, but RareX is doing the best to be the central place so that you can be included in the right studies. Jeff, did I articulate that? Okay.
Yeah, and just while you were talking, Megan, I think it's helpful for our entire community to understand, and from both your perspective and Tom, is y'all are not just an organization. Y'all are in this space. Y'all have a personal connection with this space. That's a big differentiator for me personally, and why I felt like there was a natural alignment here. Because when we talk to you all, we're not talking from you from strictly a partnership perspective. You are one of us. You know the struggles that we live every single day. Megan, I was first introduced to Megan via her experience of doing this within Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And she'll be the first to tell you, there was pluses and minuses to the work that they did. And honestly, if we can leverage those kind of shared learnings by partnering with them moving forward, it's going to save us a ton of time, a ton of money that we don't have to be dedicating towards it. And it'll allow everything to be expedited quicker, right? Especially, again, to touch on regression, because that is the primary focal point of our community. There is a very time-sensitive question around regression. It is, if you're in the midst of it, it's incredibly, urgent. If you're looking at it, approaching it, it's incredibly urgent. And if you're on the backside, it's also urgent. So I think the more that we can understand these things quickly, it'll benefit everybody. And that's what we need to be looking at from an organizational, from a rare disease perspective, is how do we cast a wider net to be more impactful? And if we're just talking about, just Kleefstra syndrome, to Megan's point earlier, how many researchers out there have heard of Kleefstra syndrome? Well, compared to epilepsy, right? They're very familiar with epilepsy. And so if seizures are a concern for your particular family, then this will help alleviate maybe some of those concerns, or provide a potential pathway that could help you. So I think that's worth referencing, just organizationally, how we went about this, why we felt like RareX was the right partner, went beyond just the platform. The platform is amazing, but the personal relationship and connection, that's what's really going to be developed over time, and make it so that I can pick up the phone or email Megan at all hours of the day, which I have, and she's been very responsive to.
And I also want to say, although my LinkedIn doesn't reveal this, I was hired to be the patient engagement lead based on the mistakes I've made for 10 years. So not many people can say I was hired for all the mistakes and the money we lost. But the bottom line was, rare diseases are told at every meeting by FDA, by Global Genes, by NORD, you've got to collect data, you've got to collect data. but they don't tell us what kind of data, where to store it, how to raise the money, or this whole governance piece. And when groups like yours have to do it on their own, they're not spending time organizing the conference or getting animal models or helping the families, with their new diagnosis. So RareX wanted to take all of that work away from the foundations and help do it for you so that you can get to the other things. One of the mistakes that we made was we asked too many questions. We asked 300 questions, and our families did not come back every year, which is why I've said it 10 times. But we also only asked questions related to the phenotype or the symptoms that had been published. And the disease had been around for 30 years, so we were sure we knew everything about the disease. Well, 5 years ago, we found out there was something that we didn't know and researchers didn't know, and there wasn't one piece of data. And that was adult psychiatric regression leading to catatonia. And there was nothing, and my daughter suffered from it. And that problem alone is what drove me to partner with RareX, because by asking in that first survey that seems so general, we ask about everything from head to toe. And if our community had thought to do that, we would have captured some data over the last 10 years that we don't have. And so it's really important that you understand that, yes, this is another effort you have to make annually, but it checks so many boxes for your community and for the researchers.
Yeah, and just to make sure we're emphasizing that kind of year over year, like we certainly want to start right now as soon as possible. So we're basically going to be launching this next week with our effort, okay? And then that longitudinal piece, the year over year, right, where we talk about the gain of function, again, to highlight the regression example. If you're seeing this kind of bell curve graphical development of the child, and then you start seeing it either plateau or go down, that's where we can start looking for those indicators, right, of the disease progression, or what to look out for, how to be proactive, rather than getting it in the midst, or even, once it's really taking grip. If we're able to get ahead of some of these things, which I've seen examples just through social media on of where we've been able to introduce some sort of therapeutic and it's been able to level it out, that's a huge impact for the burden of care, right? So that's why that longitudinal year over year input is necessary, so that we can start really gaining an understanding of what these indicators are.
And a real life example of that would be Phelan-McDermott syndrome is working with a biotech, and one of their questions was, they are trying to figure out what age group they should try this drug on. And it was really important that we were able to articulate what the ages of regression were. And one snapshot isn't going to do that. So again, I'm pretty sure RareX will automatically send you an email to remind you once a year, but I'm pretty sure Jeff and others will remind you as well. Speaking of emails, once you set up your account, you get a thanks for setting up your account. And then once you complete the informed consent, you'll get a thanks for completing the informed consent. Here's a copy if you want to print it. Should you walk away before that consent is completed, you'll get a reminder to please complete it. And the same thing, if you start a survey but don't finish it, you'll also get a reminder. The emails will not come from Jeff, they'll come from RareX, so they might go into your spam. But you also will get emails saying, however many months from now, we're excited to announce that we have a sleep survey. Please log in and answer these questions. And again, we want to give them to you in bite-sized pieces so that you're not sitting down for hours at a time answering everything under the sun. We are also trying to space out these reminders so that you don't feel like you're being attacked and guilted. And if you don't like how frequently or infrequently the emails are, let Jeff know, because he will be working with us in the early days to say, okay, we need to tweak this or we need to change that. So I just wanted to let you know that the sender of that email will be RareX.
I have a feeling everyone will jump on the sleep survey, because there is definitely a lack of that going on in our household.
And to that point, there's 2 levels of sleep survey. And the first one may say, so the general thing would be, do you have sleep issues? And then the first survey might say, do you have apnea? Do you have insomnia? Do you have, trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, and that might be it. But if you check off, apnea, there may be another survey later down the road that says, do you have obstructive apnea, non-obstructive apnea? So please don't be frustrated that you're not getting all the questions asked. And I use the sleep example because as someone who was lucky to get 3 hours consecutive sleep, when I was asked about sleep, I wanted to really make sure everybody know how miserable my life was. And, don't fret. If we don't ask you the questions right away, they'll come down the road. Jeff, I don't know if there's any more questions. I don't want to keep people longer than they need to be kept.
I don't think so. I think at this point, if there's not any other questions, then we can, we're going to be making this link very prominent and available and encouraging folks to get involved. And then we've recorded the session as well so that we can be able to distribute it to the community. And if there's any follow-up questions, then, between our core group that's been working with RareX over the past several months, we'll do our best to answer it, but also that's where Megan has been tremendous. And like I mentioned earlier, where we can just do some outreach and get some responses really, really quickly.
And just one last thing. Tom and I understand that this is so exciting and that you all are going to want to know, like, how many people really actually registered. And by the way, registered means you set up an account. Enrolled means you actually finish the consent. And so we'll be reporting to the organization on a weekly basis in the beginning. How many have registered, how many have enrolled, and what countries are they from? Over time, we'll work with your community and say, what other symptoms are really important? And that's when you'll start to see that data returned in a summary way. Like, of the 20 people that enrolled, 70% reported epilepsy, or 20% reported not feeling pain appropriately, or whatever. We're not going to return data on every single question to you because that is too much. So we'll work with Jeff and others to see, what are the things that you all want to see on a regular basis. So we encourage you. It's not a competition yet, but we can also report state by state who's enrolling. So just know there's lots of ways to track this progress. But I want to thank you all again for giving up some time on your Saturday and for being interested in supporting your community in this way.
And I do think we can set a goal. I think we can get to 50 enrollees relatively quickly, right? I like having that documented, and that way we can hold ourselves accountable because, again, the value is here. There's tremendous value. So if we can get 50 families enrolled, over the next month, I think that's a great target.
And last request, if you don't know where your genetic report is, start looking for it. So when I send you the email that says, please upload your genetic report, you're ready. If you don't have it, never got it, was given the diagnosis over the phone, work with the organization or your doctor to say, where is that report and how do I get it? IDefine can't get it for you because of regulation rules, but they might be able to suggest ways that you can get a hold of it. Because I know some families, it's not still on their refrigerator or in their top drawer, but that genetic report is going to be very important.
Awesome. Well, Tom and Megan, thank you very much for your efforts over the past several months and for today's informative webinar, and look forward to building this out together and making an impact for all of our kids.
Great. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.